believe, and annually we raise 2,000 lake sturgeon in a streamside rearing facility where they're imprinted on the Milwaukee River. And I think now the project's in its 15th year where we're actually having fish return to their parent stream. And one of my favorites is just mentoring, high school and university students in research. So what is agroforestry? Simply put, agroforestry is the cultivation and conservation of trees within agriculture. And that can look very different from one model to the next, for grazing animals amongst trees to maple syrup production to orcharding. And there are multiple models that we're going to review today. But this is by no means a new concept. It's been done since all of our roots as hunter-gatherers. And for instance, in our area, we know that the Menominee have more than a 10,000-year land tenure, meaning that they saw the receding of the glaciers and the advent of oak entering these lands. And it's well known that they occupied at one time an area over 10 million acres of land, but now reside on 219,000. Here at Riveredge, we have old village sites, we have well-documented sugar bushes, mound systems, all within a 10-mile radius of our property. So the Menominee and the Ho-Chunk and other tribes that followed lived off this land well and adapted to the natural woody habitats here. So if you're interested in more traditional ecological knowledge in North America, I would highly recommend reading For the Wilderness. It's a book that empirically goes over the science and culture behind environmental management by Native people. And it strikes a strong chord with if you have any interest in agroforestry. So speaking of environmental management, the specific practices that are being funded through the United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA, are the following. We have windbreaks, riparian forest buffers, outcropping, silvopasture, and forest farming. So there are incentive programs for these practices that you can apply for at your local NRCS office. And this is because, the US government is trying to bolster new markets and better land use practices for those markets. So we're going to review. You've seen them. Sometimes they happen on their own, and other times it's more intentional. Windbreaks, they reduced soil wind erosion. A lot of the stronger winds that you have on wide open areas where there's a lot of fetch, those strong winds get held aloft and go above your crops. So you have less wind-borne lodging. You'll have higher increases in crop yields because of it, because your crops aren't having to invest more in stabilizing themselves. So this provides habits like wildlife habitat within an agricultural system, but it can also be a sink for invasive species if you're not careful. I know mine are. The next practice that USDA funds we'll talk about is alley cropping. And this is where agricultural crops are grown simultaneous with long-term tree crops. They have similar benefits to a fence row, but this photo in the bottom right looks like it showcases walnut and corn. So it can be, and it can also be winter wheat instead of corn, or in some cases, potatoes with hazelnuts, or something entirely perennial. So this type of practice allows farmers the ability to transition their land from entirely annual crops into a brand new enterprise gradually rather than all at once. So like in this way, you might only take a 15% less yield annually due to shade or less space in your fields, with a fruit tree rows interrupting your annual crop while you're waiting for those to mature. So they reduce wind and water erosion. There's improved pollinator and wildlife habitat, increased air and soil moisture, increased carbon sequestration. There's a lot of benefits to that. Well, silvopasture, there is an integration of trees and grazing livestock operations on the same land. So these systems are intensively managed for both forest products and forage, as in the understory forage. It can be in rows or scattered like trees in a savanna. The ground cover is typically introduced, or native pasture grasses are there with some kind of fertilization and nitrogen fixing legumes, and rotational grazing systems that employ short grazing periods that maximize vegetative plant growth and harvest It tends to minimize the negative ground impacts of like small paddock management if you're moving these animals a lot in these systems. So for a landowner, the annual grazing income, it will help cash flow the tree operation while the tree crop matures and creates open approaches to access the tree products when it's harvest time. Or, simply put, if you're in an orchard that has like plum curculio weevil, which is a very common pest, if you have a backyard and an apple tree that's not producing, it's very possible that you have a plum curculio problem. The hogs, if they're medium rooters or they're let there for a short period of time, they'll actually eat the premature dropped apples, and you can reduce your plum curculio loading by about 90% or so. It's been proven well. Unless they eat your apple tree roots, that would be bad. The next practice is riparian forest buffers. So these are specified in areas adjacent to wetland habitats as a protective measure. So the obvious benefits that they have are like filtering nutrients, pesticides, and animal waste that's generally running off from agricultural lands. They stabilize eroding banks from that kind of runoff. They filter sediment from the runoff. They provide more shade, shelter, and food for fish, because water temperature is a pretty sensitive thing in a lot of streams that course through high quality stream that course through agricultural areas. And they provide habitat for other aquatic organisms and birds and corridors in general. Lastly, the other practice that USDA is funding is forest farming. So I certainly take some issue with this photo on the right. Forest farming is the cultivation of high value crops under the protection of a managed tree canopy. And in my opinion, there can be really destructive forest farming that lowers the floristic quality of important wildlife habitat through removing diverse native species and replacing them with monocultural beds to make something profitable. But there's also the potential to add to, say, a red pine monoculture, like a typical pine plantation, by diversifying its understory with elderberry or marketable herbs or non-timber forest products like ginseng, golden seal, shiitake mushrooms, native ferns, leeks. So there's a real difference in my mind is, are you adding to something degraded, or are you subtracting from something high quality? The negative can be referred to as agroforestry by subtraction, like if we let a lot of wild hogs in our high quality natural areas, right? So the intensity of forest farming production can vary from increasing leek and ginseng abundance to terracing and turning over the forest floors. One's more gentle than the other. So here at Riveredge, we have a long history of agroforestry. For the last 50 years, we've been using maple sugaring as a way to connect children and adults to forest ecosystems. We tap about 400 trees per year on a 5-acre area, mainly hauling by bags and no tubes. We serve so many pancakes, probably well over 100,000 pancakes have been consumed, and we sell our syrup. This is entirely made possible by volunteer efforts and donations to cover staff time. And the farm at Riveredge, we have a 4-acre sustainable agricultural demonstration project that's based on a permaculture design. That was made, I think, maybe almost 2 decades ago. I don't have the number, but it's a mix of apples, hazelnuts, and vegetables that's grown on a hillside, which is terraced to interrupt surface water and convey water to planting beds, minimizing erosions. It was designed by Mark Shepard a number of years ago, and before that, it was an eroding hillside of sorghum. So food grown here supports Riveredge education events, and the surplus is given to food kitchens. So other products from agroforestry that we have through our oak savanna restoration and heritage bur and white oak tree release. That's just a fancy way of saying we cut things around the important trees. We have a product of smaller diameter branch wood from sugar maples and red oaks that we're removing. So most of the branch wood stays on the forest floor as coarse woody debris for habitat and structure, but a small percentage is brought back to our farm for inoculation with spores. in early spring to grow shiitake mushrooms. You can also grow reishi mushrooms, lion's mane, a lot of diverse crops. But we dehydrate ours to have more of a consistent sale in our gift store because mushrooms go bad. Larger diameter wood from the same restoration is milled for craft and future construction. Some slab wood is always for sale if you're looking for a table or a mantle. So in order for us to talk about how we got our project started, we need to talk about conservation and land restoration in our area. One thing has to be understood. This is a very tight-knit community in Saukville where we're in a rural area where everyone used to farm, and now most everyone has a relationship with farming through lease agreements and handshakes with a few farmers that remain. So simply acquiring land and returning it to a native ecosystem can certainly shake the tree and upset some of these farmers that remain surviving off of lease agreements. So for some, 700 acres is a small family operation. Our yellow here is close to 500 acres of land representing Riveredge. It's also really important to note that in many areas, farmers are the only ones holding back the establishment of subdivisions in our area. The pressure is real. We have them going up south of us right now, and we'd much rather have a big farm than a big subdivision. So because we're recently gifted land and didn't acquire it with public dollars, we're more untethered from having to take land out of production, which allowed us to explore some more of the novel agroforestry practices that we reviewed as a way to restore without kicking out farming. So we got to know our farmers on our new parcel and got to know our neighbors well and began conducting site assessments in 2021 to look at the new parcel's ecological needs. And we call it the Sandhill Lake Wildlife Reserve to honor the previous owner. And it is this right angle 40-acre parcel you see. It was apparent that the annually cropped agricultural fields on the eastern side of this 40-acre parcel had hydric or wetland soils, and nearby uplands would continue to erode if perennial vegetation wasn't established. So there are also portions of high quality wet forests and marsh, along with acres of upland that need woody invasive species removal, and a small stream that poured out of Sandhill Lake and fed the Milwaukee River north of us. About the same time, we were able to be sub-awarded funding from the Savannah Institute through a Great Lakes Restoration Fund project to catalyze agroforestry within the region. So the Savannah Institute has been working with us the past 2 years to become a demonstration site for agroforestry practices, and we've done a great deal of internal planning and forged some new relationships with a small organic dairy producer just south of us on Highway M, and a local grazing operation north of us, the Hemble family. So we also work with Joe Mantone of Soft Hair Farms, who was pretty central to our conversion, and he was our conservation manager in 22 and 23 to spring. Many other specialists and Al Gosware, whose family worked this land for generations, and he still holds some lands just east of us, were great advisors. So what should agroforestry look like here? And why are we doing this agroforestry thing again? And you know, those were the questions that we had. And we found answers. We want to implement the idea of a community orchard that connects people to native plant crops, healthy soil and water, and increases the site's wildlife capacity. This is because there is a yawning gap between people and native plants and the connection to avian decline. All those three things are just out in orbit in people's minds. So we plan to fix that. In order to start that, we had to make some disturbance. We had to have a driveway and a culvert and an address and a place to park, place to drop off and unload supplies, and a gate. In addition to that, The property boundaries were poorly marked. We had to resurvey our property boundaries to know that we were cutting on our land and freeing up fence lines, as well as the access ways were really well clogged up with buckthorn, as you can see. A lot of our uplands are now free of mature woody invasive species, and we did a lot of that through cut stump work with volunteers, chainsaws, brush cutters, hand saws, and just pulled the material to a fence line and hired a forestry grapple to just pile all the stuff to burn. Did a little light forestry mowing too. We also established 5 permanent monitoring plots for breeding bird surveys during that time. So since 2021, we've been studying the avian populations. While we've been planting, monitoring, and we have all this planting, monitoring, and restoration plans over a large area, most of the demonstration site is focused on these colored polygons. You can see our property line outlined here in red. And thankfully, our neighbors to the east, the Molines, provided Riveredge with a wider buffer from corn and soy production on their property. It's that extra large yellow polygon to the east. We were seeing really big effects from herbicide drift and needed to ensure that the woody crops we were planting did not get zapped. Nowadays, there's so much Roundup resistance that 2,4-D, which is a lot more volatile, and if it's sprayed on a windy day with a 90-foot boom sprayer, it ended up getting about 1,400-foot stretch of willows up to 30-foot tall. They all turned brown. So we want to avoid that for investing in woody plants in the area. So you'll notice the yellow areas are installed as cool season grass pasture, and that's because we have people in the immediate area that can use hay. We planted this last year after a period of drought, and it's currently up. It's also appealing because mowed grass or taking grass off before fall reduces a lot of vole densities. And so we're not having as many grainivores about that like to girdle bark. That's a concern of ours for at least establishing a woody crop until they have a larger caliper and can tolerate some bark feeding. The dark green in the west is a custom mix of floodplain herbaceous prairie species that we'll be seeding. Its site's really wet, and we've worked this ground and are on the last step to make sure the planting site's ready for seed and void of perennial weeds. The center, light green, is what you see we're calling the Silvopasture. And you'll see on the next slide what the layout is quite linear. So north is on the left, south is on the right. The top is east and the bottom is west. So it's kind of tilted from our normal orientation of this last photo that you saw. So here we have wide fields between 700-foot long paired rows of trees and shrubs. The 2 80-foot wide grass strips can accommodate being baled, or if we find the right farmer, some light grazing, rotational grazing, or a poultry grazing chicken tractor operation would be great. There are 3 sets of paired rows of woody native plants that provide humans and wildlife pollen, fruit, and nuts throughout the year. The site's wetter on the lower end and tends drier and more exposed going up the hill, so our species were selected accordingly. And I'm just going to go through this because this is a little bit difficult to see. I don't know how it looks on your screen, but starting on the lower end on row 6, we have elderberry, and we actually have about 5 species of elderberry, varieties of elderberry that we're going with. And right now we have about 3 that are ready to get in the ground. We have every 80-foot center is an oak, establishing this entire silvopasture. So between oaks is 80-foot stretch where we're including species like in row 5, pawpaw, transitioning to a long 80-foot section of native herbs, and then nannyberry, and then blackhaw. If you don't know what blackhaw is, it's sort of the savanna version of nannyberry. We have in row 4 a hazelnut, where we were trying to find beaked hazel. There's not really a market for that. We might explore hybrid hazelnut. I'm a little bit against having hybrid hazelnut for fear that it would not be as conducive to the Lepidopteran community, being part European and part American. We have American plum within bur oak, trending to chinkapin oak with serviceberry in between. And then row 2 is American hazelnut, ending with row 1 that is entirely chinkapin oak with American plum, serviceberry, and a little section of buffalo berry. That's really not a very tasty plant, but so unbelievably similar to autumn olive that we want to use it for educational purposes. So let's go back to what we've done so far. To prepare the ground best, we arranged for Roden Farms, which is one of the larger farmers in our area that had lease to this land, to finish their lease on soy, which provides the best neutral and level seeding bed. But unfortunately, their technicians planted winter rye seeds in the fall of 2022. So as you can see on the left, there was a lot of green coming up in that photo. And if you know anything about rye, it can have an allelopathic response and lower seedling recruitment in addition to smothering. It's kind of a smother crop. So we decided to finish the rye and harvest in that rye that overwintered and came up. We harvested in the summer of 2023. And so we were set back on our prairie, we're set back on our pasture. And we actually added another cover crop of buckwheat to keep the weeds down, because that is a great smother crop and it does provide a minor pollinator benefit. Where there was poor rye recruitment, we were able to drill seed that. You can see the drill seed lines in the middle photo, and then the more mature crop. So cover crops can be used in small prairie plantings, like on the edge of your house, to hold soil and shelter new prairie plants if you're doing a prairie seeding. Normally, I use oats for prairie seedings because it's less smothering and there's a lot more available light for young seedlings. Well, the crop grew so big that the layout we had done with metal T-posts that was very exacting for the silvopasture had to be bolstered with 10-foot PVC sleeves before the organic dairy farmer was able to bale our crop. We were worried that he was going to eat the T-posts and mess up his equipment. And the Hembles helped us work in the residual weeds by disking without herbicide, because we're just dealing with annuals at that point, and we were able to follow up by drill seeding orchard grass and timothy throughout the silvopasture, as well as the neighbors buffered cool season grass field to keep us having some distance from the more annual crop production further east. And we chose barnyard grass and timothy. Timothy is pretty friendly in droughts. Barnyard grass is a good forage. There's a lot of horses in the area, and they don't do well with legumes. So it was just a single grass mix. We're going to be seeding the prairie in this spring by hand. If you'd like to join us, please let me know. Always welcome folks to come. Our timeline for installation of oaks was happening right after the rye was pulled off and baled in June of 2023. This was done with our volunteer habitat healers, our staff team, and the AmeriCorps crew that we had hosted and were mentoring. So our volunteer Lon, he was really central to keeping these trees happy as he watered them through the drought we were experiencing. If you recall from the layout sheet, these oaks are in the framework for 3 individual rows. They're planted at 80-foot intervals, and they have native shrubs planted in between them this year. We chose larger trees to get past the deer browse line and improve the perceived establishment of the site. You'll notice the hardware cloth that Nathaniel and I are installing. That was really to limit buck rubbing, as well as vole girdling in areas where we have mulch mounds. They tend to like to nestle in those mulch too. So we wanted to grow bare root seedlings for a year or two to make sure they could get an accelerated growth through droughts we were having by more consistent watering and protection against deer and small mammals. We chose felt pots because they degrade actually instead of plastic pots, and they don't yield girdling roots. due to a process called air pruning. Thanks to the air exchange of the felt, roots get feedback to branch and not girdle round and around. Also, the pots have nice big handles to move them. We see another part of this is apples as part of our cultural history, and a comfortable step for folks that are less adventurous, like are they going to drive all this way for something called nannyberry? They might come here for the apples, but leave getting to know more about other crops and maybe taste some hazelnuts or have some elderberry spritzer or whatever when we invite people in for some of our fruit and nut events that we'll be hosting when we get crops. So far, I've grafted about 50 heritage varieties of apples that will be planted along our trail to the Silvopasture. There are about 400 documented apples that were bred in this state alone, and all of them are more delicious than the red delicious that you have in the stores. So that little section that showcased herbs in the second row, some natives are edible and not commercially available, but are still viable for root expansion by taking a percentage of the roots and propagating them in the right soil type. So we have many ground nuts here, which is a local edible root that grows on our land. It's a vine, so it would actually pair really well with the Jerusalem artichoke, which is another starchy native. But this plant has some unique history, and one of the reasons I want to grow it is that there were some historic laws out there that prohibited indigenous people from harvesting this, because with light cultivation, it can yield up to 5 pounds of tuberous starchy roots in the right setting. So it's a pretty interesting story. The only downfall with this is that some people throw up when they eat it and other people don't. So you kind of have to draw to figure out which kind of person you are. But other than that, it is actually quite an amazing flower. It has a huge pollinator benefits. It's lovely, even just as a landscaping plant. It has a wonderful story. So we're going to get to talk a little bit about crop profiles. Here we have American plum. I'll have to say American plum is one of my favorites, probably my second favorite of all the crops that we're growing. It can be more or less of a tree form plant, or it can be maintained as a thicket. You'll see these white flowers down in the photo below. That's through disturbance mowing. It's just, think of it like a mini aspen stand. Okay, you make a disturbance or a fire, or you cut it, and it comes back and suckers from the roots. And this can be very good if you're trying to establish a privacy screen, or if you want a section of food forest in your home, or if you're looking to increase the nesting success for birds in your area. Not only does it have a really, really good fruit crop, it also has a whole host of native bees and butterflies. And some of the stats I got from the Pollinator Partnership, about 45 species of butterflies and moths, but the genus of Prunus is about 283 leps that rely on it. And it's a pretty hardy plant for a dry to medium moisture, so I think it's going to do well on our site. We got all of our plums from one of my friends, Sam Thayer, who's a pretty well-known wild edible author. He actually grubs them from his wild plum nursery, where he has found a large fruited, a early fruiting, and a late fruiting variety that we have that we're going to be growing. There's some other plums you might be familiar with if you're from south like me. Between Missouri and Illinois, there's the Chickasaw plum, which is a little bit bigger, kind of taps out at the Illinois border, but I think it would be a great experiment to bring some up here if you can find a source. Again, a wonderful plant that grows in your yard, and it is a plant that you can smell, and it is such a lovely smell. It's about to break bud here at Riveredge. And again, 4 years until you can get a fruit, but what they say, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best time is today. So let's get those trees planted. Nannyberry. I used to have nannyberry eating contests when I was younger. That didn't work out so well. It actually is a really wonderful tasting plant. It has sort of like this pasty texture, like a fruit leather already, just kind of off the berry. It is really important when you're thinking about native fruits and bird migration. So these kinds of fruits that we have ready in fall are more rich in the fats that birds need for migration, as opposed to a lot of these other fruits that are invasive, that are high in sugar content and actually metabolically detrimental for birds to eat. This is one great plant to have. And the benefits of it is I do not think that deer prefer it very much. Oftentimes when I am doing savanna restoration or I'm in a degraded site, I am finding loads of buckthorn, common buckthorn, and I'll find one every 50 feet, a nannyberry, standalone. And it's really important if you have a forestry mower come to your site or if you've got a bunch of people ready to cut, to go ahead and pre-flag your degraded site. You most likely have nannyberry, and it's going to be in your best interest to flag that ahead of time so it doesn't get cut. If it gets cut and not herbicided, it'll sprout back. In fact, for production, we like to coppice these plants when they get a little bit old and harder to reach those berries. They can stump sprout back down to the stool that you cut them on quite vigorously. And they also sucker lightly within their drip zone. So recorded about 17 species of butterflies and moths, but 77 for viburnum. And you can rank blackhaw in here. I don't think you're going to get a specific quote for larval host for blackhaw. It's very similar to nannyberry. Talked about apples a little bit already. If you're kind of gearing up and interested in apples from my talk here, we have a lot of volunteer experts that and other people that help us out finding the scion wood that's needed and helping us out to reach our goals to have about 300 varieties at Riveredge. So I think all in all, there's around 17,000 between North America and Canada. And, you know, think about not just the apple trees that we eat from the store, but crab apples. Folks think that, you know, a prairie doesn't have shrubs, but, you know, all these things that we've talked about so far, wild plums, crab apples, hazelnuts, those things are used to prairie. They're used to fire. They are part of our old landscape. And just like savanna isn't a prairie with trees, a prairie isn't just a place for herbaceous plants without any woodies. So it's, again, really great for bees, native bees and butterflies. I can make these profiles available to you all if you're interested as a PDF when we're done here. And a lot of LEPs, maybe 187 here as it's listed. Service berries, excellent taste. I prefer them over blueberries. They're very big in Canada and Ontario in the green belt. They're grown commercially. They're grown commercially. We are growing the Allegheny, Amelanchier alleghenyensis. It's can be tree formed, but you can actually cut it back to a coppiced suckering stump, so you can actually get that fruit in higher density within your reach. It does really well in a thicket because birds also like it, so you want to overplant this in your yard. It also, for an artistic quality, if you can find at Johnson's Nursery a triple or a single stem service berry, they're quite exquisite to have next to your home. They're slower growing, but they do, some of them can reach a height of 20 feet. And in about 4 years, you're gonna, 2 to 3 years, you'll have fruit. But I think commercially, they like to grow berries on a maximum of 4-year-old wood. So there's a lot of mowing to head back that plant commercially. And oaks, they're kind of the frame of a lot of our ecosystems. They're a keystone plant. And it takes like 50 to 60 years to get a very strong masting crop. And some just don't have a great masting crop, but we do know that they're extremely important for lepidopterans, for birds, namely a lot of the inchworms that nearly freeze solid on their limbs that get gleaned by kinglets and the chickadees that you see at your feeders. Chickadees are about 50% diet insects. Kinglets, I think, are near 100. And so having these oaks in the landscape in and around are providing that other food source that's not just the nuts that humans have relied upon historically. The leaves are really important. Once you're in a system where you lose leaves, you lose the ability to burn, you lose the ability to manage invasives at scale. And even in your little backyard, having that a plant that can carry fire is really great. Hazelnut, this is very similar in aggressiveness to wild plum. You can make your own thickets, you can make your own hedgerows. It's a great clonal shrub that can stay kind of in a barrel form. If you have mowed grass, you can maintain it in its place, or if you want to encourage it to expand, you can head it back during the dormant season and watch those suckers come out, or just don't mow around it and it will creep out. About 3 to 5 years to get a crop, and this plant is available through the state nursery, very small, but much larger varieties, quicker to a hazelnut crop you can get more immediately for your landscape at Johnson's, or through the plant sale, I believe that LMBO is having right now. They might have some of these for sale. I encourage you to log into their site and get some of those. Elderberry, we mentioned we're growing about 5 varieties. There is the Sambucus nigra var canadensis, which is the real common elderberry. There have been folks that are making local land races around here, and there's a lot that you can buy online that might not do very well in our climate, just because our growing season isn't long enough for some of these varieties that are for sale, and we're starting to find that out. But we found a local grower that's coming to our agroforestry field day that has some land races here that are fantastic. One he calls Dexter, because he found it growing up through his deck and he couldn't kill it. And it's very, very aggressive. And some of these will yield about 1,500 pounds of berries per acre, which is fantastic for a lot of local niche markets that are out there. That's a great larval host. It's tolerant to shade. That's hard to kill. You can take, it's totipotent, so you can take suckers, angle cut the bottom, flat cut the top near a bud, and you can actually live stake it into the ground. And as long as you keep it moist, it'll do really well. It'll come up with probably about an 80% success rate of live stakes. And pawpaw, this photo on the left is from the Merrimack river bottoms in Missouri. When I visited there in April, they have it has these blood red blooms before the leaves are out. And pawpaw is one of these trees that you actually need to get more than one variety or more than one kind, because it is monoecious. It has the male and female flowers, but it does a poor job at self-pollinating because the male flowers are not in cadence with the female flowers on the same plant. So the bloom periods from April to May. We're working to try and find a more northern variety and bring it south than having southern varieties and bring them north for fear of issues with frost. And now we're just going to get into the monitoring of the site. This is sort of like the closing end. It's going to take me about 8 minutes here. We have photo witness posts that we've erected throughout our silvopasture and other areas of the property to capture a chronosequence of change over time. And you actually might find some of these numbered posts hiking. We're going to have a portal for you to be able to contribute them at some point through Google Survey. It's actually just a phone rest. It's like a little ledge. It's not really a post. You can see I screwed that into a tree. So the breeding bird surveys, since 2021, we've been developing a baseline of breeding bird surveys every June. And of the 5 permanent points that we have highlighted for this property, we're looking at 0.4 data, which is the silvopasture, looking at percent relative abundance and population trend. And so about 47% of our population is in decline. We've all heard of avian decline. Who thought the blue jays that you saw as a kid that were annoying? You know, I don't know if you got Like, what is that bird? It's always screaming in my ear. Those are decreasing. There's a lot of things that I think we think are common that are decreasing. So 47% of that population that we have is in decline, 27% stable, and the 25% that are increasing, I just don't have shown. I don't have the ability to fit all that on one screen. And Milwaukee Audubon actually did really well and helped sponsor some ornithology interns for us. And Jana Getteman worked up a lot of this data. We have a great report that we can share soon about that. We're also monitoring for insect abundance. There's other sites like us. I think Mequon Nature Preserve has one of these tents. This is a malaise trap that takes dominant winds and traps insects, and it captures insect abundance data during specific time points that the swallowtails, that swallows or aerial insectivores are having significant energy requirements. So during those specific survey times, it's supposed to correlate more about the health of that specific species. But we're utilizing it as a trap to just look at overall insect abundance in addition to those survey periods, so we can see that change over time. And we've been monitoring bumblebees. We definitely have a lot of bumblebees nearby, have not actually been able to get out to Sandhill yet to do that. We're going to be scheduling a bumblebee survey this year, but we have in the area endangered species, declining species. A lot of them are all imperiled. And what can make a big difference is having places for wood to rot or standing or rot on the ground, less tillage. That's where they nest, is in the ground, right? They need that stuff. Increased flower diversity and participate in no mow May. And I think it's kind of funny. A lot of people look down at like not mowing your lawn. Like we also have like piles of dishes that are for the pollinators and like piles of laundry that are for the pollinators. But it's like the habitat they need, and they can have a month, right? I'd also encourage you to look at the Weebee app to look at how native insects are utilizing your property. We have about 690 surveys done on our farm that really showed we didn't need honeybees. And in fact, a lot of honeybees can cause viral loading by co-visitation of flowers, causes a big issue with bumblebees that are sensitive to a lot of the viruses that honeybees can carry. So we've ceased to have honeybee leases, especially those leases that take forklifts and load up all the hives into a refrigerator truck and travel to Florida. It seems like a real big disease vector to me. We're also doing some bioacoustic monitoring. This is going to be the first year that we're going to have data for bats and frogs and toads. Those are readily digestible. The bird data still needs a lot of human listeners to dissect, but we're real excited about that device and sharing the data over time. And we would love your help. Become a Riveredge volunteer. We meet every Wednesday, but we also do Thursdays and Tuesday volunteering. We do that year round, and it can help us with our prairie seeding, our planting, watering. We have a lot of other tasks. And if this is interesting at all to you, you want to know more, you want to know how to plant prairie, I'm going to be doing a session on how to plant prairie in your backyard, your back 40, as well as all these specialty crops. We're going to have leading experts in the area talking about hazelnuts, elderberries, and apples. May 19th, free beer, lunch is included. It's going to be good. And we've got some sponsors to thank. And that's all I got. Any questions?
You can feel free to unmute yourself and ask directly if you have any questions.
And that's okay if you don't.
And if you think of them later, feel free to email us at info@lmbo.org, and we can definitely get your questions to Matt. I know that was a lot of information. That was really fascinating to me. I didn't know a lot about agroforestry, so I appreciated learning that. All right, last chance. Does anybody have any questions?
I don't have a question, but I want to thank you, Matt, so much. and I learned a whole bunch, but what I am most excited about is trying that live staking of the elderberry because I didn't know that was a species that could live stake. So thank
Yes,
you.
yes. Well, thank you everybody so much. And again, buy some plants from Lake Michigan Bird Observatory. Get on their plant sale. I think they still have some time left for that. Become a co-volunteer for Riveredge and Lake Michigan Bird Observatory. All that good stuff.